It was always understood from the very beginnings of discoveries of X-rays that they were dangerous in the wrong hands. And there was a huge debate about whose hands were wrong. Beauty salon owners and people who made products for health using radium were always quite clear that they were on the right side of science. They were doing nothing that wasn't being done in labs, that wasn't being done in hospitals. They always argued that they knew what they were doing and they were able to have these products for sale because they were giving proper evidence-based information about what would work and what wouldn't work.
Welcome to My Nuclear Life. I'm Shelly Lesher. On today's show, I have Lucy Jane Santos. Lucy has an interest in the science behind the history of cosmetics, which is the focus of her first book, Half-Lives: The Unlikely History of Radium. You can use the link on our webpage to purchase the book from the UK with free worldwide shipping. If you are in the US or other parts of the world, you have to wait until July 2021 to purchase in-country. But after you've heard today's podcast, you will want a copy. Lucy is researching her next book about the non-utilitarian aspects of uranium, due out sometime in 2023. Although I am familiar with radium in the scientific field, I have not had much exposure to it as a consumer product except for the museum website at Oak Ridge. And this website is titled Radioactive Quack Cures. Of course, there are many connotations associated with the name quack cures. And this is one of the first things Lucy and I discuss, and something that her book addresses and treats radium completely differently. Your book was so interesting to me because it discussed a topic that I had never run across. You really go into the beauty industry, and that's what I think is the most interesting part of your book. At the beginning, you asked this question, which is, how did we get from enthusiastic use of radium beauty treatments to the revulsion we feel today? When you tell people that you're looking at radium in consumer products, what is their reaction to that?
It is shock and horror. The route I came into the book was the route that I think a lot of people have heard of radium treatments. And it is those lists, 10 things that our ancestors used to do that now seem stupid, that type of lists. And they come up with snappier titles than that. But, that type of thing. What did we used to do to ourselves? And the subtext is, we are cleverer now. We are more informed. We know what we're putting into our bodies. We know what we're putting onto our faces. And I always read those lists, and radium would always come up. And it was always, well, there has to be something more to it. People just didn't decide to put a radioactive substance on their face or in their lipsticks for no reason. People aren't stupid. There has to be something more. And that's the route I came into it. And again, until I like to think people have read my book, most people will just assume that somebody made a really stupid decision. It was a limited decision. Maybe there was one or two products out there that people could buy. And the people that did it were just stupid. And it's nothing to do with us. And it's nothing to do with how we live our lives now. It was a one-off thing. And aren't we better now? That is the start of it, I think.
So was it a one-off thing?
No. If we're looking at beauty treatments, and that is the part of the story that interested me the most, is the beauty treatments. If we're looking at that, I identified several hundred companies that over a space of 50, 60 years produced products that were specifically designed for your complexion or as a makeup, mascaras, lipsticks, all of those things. There's hundreds of companies. And it wasn't just in the US, it wasn't just in Britain, it was in France, it was in Portugal, Spain, Poland. I mean, pretty much anywhere you can think of, I found either a company that was making them or importing them from, say, France. I've got a lovely advert of a theatre programme in Egypt in 1935, and they're advertising a French makeup brand that's made out of radium. So it's a huge market.
And you said it lasted 50 to 60 years, so this wasn't just 5 or 6 years. It was a sustained period of time.
Yes, I look at one product in the book that is by a Mayfair salon owner whose name was Helen Cavendish. And she was a beauty salon owner. She had 2 salons in Mayfair, which is the heart of rich London in the 1920s. And she sold a range of products, including a hair restorer. And this product was still on sale into the 1960s. So I can find it from about 1912, I think, was the earliest I found the product. But again, in different variations of it, it's still being advertised. I think it's 1962 I found the last advert for it.
Wow.
That's a successful run for any beauty company.
Absolutely. So why don't we go back a little bit? Can you explain just briefly about when radium was discovered? You don't have to explain the science, but just when it was discovered and why there was a consumer or a public excitement around that discovery.
So we're looking at the late 1890s here. It's a world where there's already a scientific interest in rays, in visible rays. So we have a discovery that some minerals emit an invisible ray. This is identified and named by Marie Curie, and it was the radioactivity. And then various science things happened. And Marie Curie isolates these 2 new radioactive elements, radium and polonium. This turns science on its head because now, through various science means, they discover that various elements emit this radioactivity and they change into something else, and they're spontaneously changing into other elements. It takes a long time to explain what is happening to these elements, why they're emitting these rays, and why they're spontaneously changing. So there's a lot of speculation about this, about the process. And this gets then picked up by entrepreneurs because it gets picked up by the press first. And people are interested in why it's happening, what's happening, and how it can be used. Because again, as soon as there's a scientific discovery, people want to know how they can make money out of it. So right from the beginning, there's this idea that perhaps these elements can be used to do something new. One of the things that was really interesting was that as they're spontaneously changing, they're emitting a heat. So there was a lot of speculation about how this heat could be manipulated into making more energy. So it's kind of the same discussion that we're having now, how to make clean, reliable and cheap energy. And there was the belief that radium somehow would be able to do that, but it was unexplored and really didn't go anywhere at the point. It was also found that radium emitted a light as well. So it was a beautiful blue glowy light that Marie Curie described. Marie and her husband Pierre described putting little vials of radium on the walls of their lab and watching it at nighttime. So I think she called it something like fairy lights or fairy dust. So there was these ideas that there was heat, there was light, there was energy, and then there was an excitement as well. And these ideas then start coming into the commercial world. From around about 1902, you can see people starting taking these ideas of radium, not the actual substance itself, because at that point it's so rare, so expensive, unless by 1901, unless you were friends with the Curies, you wouldn't really be able to get any radium at all. So it's so rare, it's so expensive, it produces heat, it produces light, it's modernity. And these ideas then come into the commercial world. So you get companies, there's a lovely one from 1903 in Manchester, and their company is fire grates. But they start talking about their fire grates in terms of radium. You also get the fashion industry as well, picking up the colour. So you got that blue-green colour of radium that the Curies had been talking about in scientific publications. And then there's this idea that radium could be a colour, so it'd be an iridescent colour. It could be white, it could be blue, it could be green. The idea really was it was shimmering in some way. So any fabric that shimmered would be known as radium.
So do you find this in fashion pages, for example, when you look back that a woman's dress is described as radiant?
There's 2 ways it would be described. So they could be talking about the colour. There is an article from 1903, I think it is, and it's a British newspaper, the Daily Mail, and they're talking about a swimsuit, and they call it radium, and that's the colour. So it's an iridescent white. So they talk about how it shines. Radium is also a type of fabric as well. So it's a velvety, modern fabric. I don't know how people would completely understand the word radium in terms of fashion, because it could be colour or it could be fabric. But I think what they're referring to is an image that it gives of something being modern, up to date, attractive, expensive, luxurious. So it's less important as a descriptor as it is about just giving a general ambience of the word.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's first being used to describe heat or light, to shimmer. When is it first used in consumer products?
If you're thinking of consumer products of something that you can walk down a street and buy, the first time it's being used is actually with regards to makeup. So the earliest I can find a trademark being applied for and being given for the word radium was 1903. And this is for preparations for the skin, teeth, hair, and soap. So they're specifically trademarking it for the use of the word radium for beauty products. So you get that in 1903.
Hold on. So someone trademarked the word radium?
Yes. Well, this is specifically in Britain. So a man called Thomas Grosset, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, Grosert, is in early 1903, applies for a trademark, is granted a trademark for the word radium, but it is specifically for skincare and hair care products. So he is the person that has permission to use the word radium for those styles of products. Now, I can't actually find any evidence that he used the trademark. I haven't been able to find any products from that period, but we know that somebody had the intention to do that, or they felt the need to trademark it to prevent somebody else from doing it before them. I haven't been able to find any evidence that he himself made a product called radium, which is very upsetting.
Did this come into play later? Did he ever try to sue someone for use of his trademark?
Well, we know by 1909, the original trademark was assigned to somebody else. So again, I don't know whether it was sold or it was lapsed and someone else reapplied. I haven't actually been able to find that out. But by 1909, the trademark radium for skin and hair preparations is owned by a man called Frank Reginald Brighton. And now he did absolutely do something with it as well. So he was the maker of a product called Blandford's Radium Hair Food Tonic and Restorer. And he came up with this wonderful product, and it was really, really successful. He was very well known for his radium hair product. It was sold in Harrods and top London stores. And I'd love to find out more about it. I've never actually found a bottle of it. I've seen an illustration from the Harrods catalogue of the product, and it looks a very exciting bottle with little rays popping out of the word radium. But the idea for that was that it would reinvigorate your hair. So you would put it on your head, and through mystical means, it would revitalize the follicles. It would restore your hair color back to normal as well. It would do lots of different things.
Did it have radium in it?
Again, we don't know. I've not seen a particular claim for it that it says we definitely have radium in it. But they were certainly trading on the associations of what people thought radium would do if it was applied for the hair. One of the reasons I think it may not have had radium in it is because he actually sued Helen Cavendish in 1915 because she used the word radium in one of her products. Her products were called the Helen Cavendish Radium Skin Beautifiers or hair tonics. And so Brighton took her to court over what he said she was using his trademark. She was using something she wasn't entitled to use because he owned the word or owned the descriptor. And there was a big court case. And in the end, the judge did actually come down on the side of Helen Cavendish. The judge agreed that she was using the word radium to describe the contents of her product. So she was describing the contents, not using a word as a trademark, which makes me think that maybe the Blandford's Radium Hair Restorer wasn't actually made with radium. They were just using it as a trademark. They were using it as a word to make people associate that product with all the good things about radium that was understood at the time, that it was modern, that it was somehow powerful. It was an invisible power that could be manipulated and shaped to your will. Whereas I think that Helen Cavendish, because the judge ruled that the radium was describing the product, was actually using radium water in her products.
When was the first time you found that someone was actually using radium in their products? So Blandford was using the word, but when can you identify the use of the material?
The earliest use was probably in the spa towns of Europe, actually. So going back a little bit, when Marie Curie was trying to isolate these new elements that she suspected she'd found, she was trying to get them from a substance called pitchblende, which is a mineral that's mostly found in the mining town of Yakimov, which is in the Czech Republic. Once she discovered radium, and once it had been accepted that this was a new element, there was a lot of interest in this town, which became a spa town, because one of the things that came out of this period of trying to discover what radium was, what radioactive elements were, was that radium transformed into a gas. So there was radon gas, or that radium could be used to infuse water with radioactivity. And this mining town in Czech Republic that had been the source of Marie Curie's pitchblende realized that they had a really valuable substance, and they opened up and became the spa town, and they sold themselves as a place where you could go and bathe in radioactive water, in radium water, or inhaling radon gas. And they did this from 1904, actually. I found some products, and they would be selling bottles of this radium water. So you could take a little bottle of radium water home with you. And that is really one of the first products that was available. It wasn't necessarily available in shops, but if you went to this specific spa town, enjoyed yourself, you could take home a little bottle of radium water. And the idea was that you would be continuing the treatment that you had in the town at home. Because when I talk about spa towns, I'm not talking about places where you'd go and get nails done or just relax. This is the use of water for medical purposes. So you would go to treat rheumatism, gout, serious diseases.
Was this the first time that spa towns were used to treat these medical conditions, or were they used before this time period?
There's already a long tradition of going to spa towns to be healed. You can trace it pretty much as far back as history can go, because the idea is that water is good for you. And over the centuries, there's lots of debate about what it was in the water of specific places that was good for you. So what minerals were there? Some people would say that the waters were really full of iron, and that would be good for you, or arsenic. In the 1840s, there was a big fashion to go to arsenical springs because the arsenic would be good for you. And then in the early 20th century, this longer tradition has just expanded to include radium. You go in to specific spa towns around the world and you will be able to bathe in radioactive waters.
So it's not a big leap then. It's not surprising that people were associating radium with something very good and beneficial for them, or this radium water was something beneficial.
No, the only real difference, I think, is that for the first time, science was seeming to back up the idea, because although people used water treatments, there was always a big back and forth about whether it was actually true or whether it's more sort of a placebo effect, whether people were getting better or whether they just get better anyway. But for the first time, because you've got these hefty scientists, the Marie Curies of the world, saying, we've found something, it's different, it's new, it can be used in all of these very different ways. For the first time, there was science really, I think, to back up the claims. And the spa directors and the people who really believed in water treatments absolutely aligned themselves with these cutting-edge science laboratories. And it was, I think it was like about 1904, Pierre Curie was going around Europe testing the waters of big spa towns. So you get places like, it's now known as Karlovy Vary, and they had been a massive water treatment place for centuries. I think it was the 18th century. It was the jewel of Europe. Kings and queens would go there. You would go there for treatment, but it was also the social scene as well. It was where the wealthy hang out. And in Britain as well, you've got a town called Bath, which since the pre-Roman times had been this place where you would go and have your water treatments. Again, popularity ebbs and flows, but at points it had been the most fashionable place to go. That's where you'd go for a season in Bath and take the waters.
Was there any radioactivity found in the city of Bath?
Yes, so very early on, around about 1904, I think it was. You'll see from what I say, 1902, 1903, 1904 is the point where people are testing waters. Mm-hmm. They are getting trademarks. They're getting really excited. I think it's about 1904 in Bath. They measured the waters and they said, oh, we've found that it contains radium. Good for us. And it was good for them because as soon as the town could say our waters are radioactive, people became very interested.
When did that start falling out of favor then for cities like Bath?
Specifically for radium water, Bath used the fact that their waters contained radium in their marketing materials for decades. It really peaks in about the 20s and 30s, and then it sort of drizzles out a little bit. But it's less because people are worried about radium or the associations of claiming that their water is radioactive, but more that it just becomes a bit commonplace every day. So it's just nothing to remark upon. Yes, our water is radioactive. Yes, it's quite good for you. But, there's other minerals here as well that are good for you. So it becomes very, very nothing. One of the things that by 1948 in Britain, the NHS, National Health Service, is established. And people have access to better medical treatments in general. So the belief that water treatments are going to be beneficial actually starts dying out because there's so much other better things out there as well. The rise of antibiotics means that people can go to the doctors and get treatments rather than relying on this sort of old-fashioned water treatment. So really, in terms of radium water, specifically in Britain, it's less that people don't want to bathe in radium water and more to do people don't believe in water treatments particularly anymore.
Okay.
On top of that.
That makes sense. What were some of the most outrageous products that you found that contain radium? I know my students are always surprised by radium chocolate.
Yes, radium chocolate is amazing. It always gets mentioned, but actually it's one of the products that seems to have one of the least amount of evidence that it was very widespread. I can really find maybe one, maybe two companies that produce radium chocolate. One of them is this German company, Berk and Braun, and they produced radium chocolates made out of radium water. So again, they're getting radium water from a spa, possibly, and they're using that to make their chocolate. So it's probably just very minute amounts, just mixing it in with the general chocolate and then shipping it out. So the chances of it poisoning you, for instance, or causing any damage through exposure to radioactivity is slim to none. But it really does capture the imagination, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Have you found anything that's even more outrageous?
One of the things with this project is a lot of the products that I thought would contain radium and were very outrageous don't actually. So there's radium condoms, for instance. I see them all over the place. Radium Mutex condoms.
Yes.
They're an American brand. You see them in every article about radium in consumer items. Didn't contain radium. And it's devastating to me, reassuring in general.
I would have to agree because that's the one that I am shocked about. It's radium contraception. I agree with you. I'm grateful that it doesn't contain it, but also a little disappointed because that is the most outrageous one.
It definitely is. And it's really the one that it does capture people's attention on these articles about the topic. Unfortunately, it's just using the word radium as some sort of brand association. Nutex, the company that produced those radium condoms, are well known for producing lots of different names of their condoms. So they seem to have this sort of scattered approach of naming their products. So they're always Nutex condoms, but then they're radium and Trojan or whatever they are. So they've got loads and loads and loads of names. So for them, it was a nothing. Probably didn't even think too much about what 60 years later we would be thinking about.
Right.
Just thinking that radium is somehow like platinum or gold. It indicates expensive, luxurious, that type
They're
of
like,
thing.
ooh, buy this expensive condom.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty certain that the radium here is an association with energy, luxuriousness. One of the things about radium was that it did give you a little bit of a pep. And there's lots of radioactive tonics where people took them to pep them up, give themselves energy. And again, perfect for a condom.
Okay. I actually want to talk a little bit about the beauty industry because your book talks a lot about this, and it's something I knew absolutely nothing about. Could you explain the beauty salon during the early 20th century and how that was different than before, say, World War I? Just a brief evolution of the beauty salon.
The beauty industry is becoming established. So I am particularly interested in the beauty industry till about the 1930s. And you're getting away from the idea that achieve beauty is a private affair, the one that you shouldn't talk about or necessarily buy any products to help you with. Somehow good, clean living, godly thoughts, and maybe the odd bit of crush a rose petal and put it on your cheeks just to encourage a flush is really all that a respectable woman would aspire to do. And then so in the early 20th century, you're getting this idea that actually to go to a beauty salon, to go to a place where somebody else, who's not your maid or your sister or yourself, would do your hair, would help you improve your skin through mechanical means, apply makeup for you, or hair removal is another thing as well. So it becomes more of a business. Obviously, women have always turned to experts and there's always been products available to buy. But it becomes not only more acceptable, but also considered to be essential. Part of the beauty industry turning from being associated with quacks and patent medicine producers to becoming a respectable business is they embrace science. So you start getting these beauty salons, and by beauty salon again I mean a place that you would go to. So I talk in the book about Harrods, the famous London department store. In the 1890s they had a hairdressing place where women could go to have their hair styled, not cut, not washed, just styled. And then by the early 20th century it becomes bigger, better, more people come to it. By the 1920s you get this massive redevelopment of salons. Salons are now the place where you go for luxury. Loads of beauty salons suddenly become these wonderful Art Deco palaces, styled like ocean liners. Everything is pastel, everything is luxurious. There's hot and cold running water. And again, in a time, especially in Britain, where a lot of houses wouldn't have this, going to these places is an amazing treat. And again, beauty salons really embrace science and technology and these developments as a way of differentiating themselves from their past, but also from quack sellers and patent medicine sellers. They say we embrace science. Science underpins our products, and it also underpins our place as well, because we have perm machines, hair dryers, as I said, hot and cold running water, telephones, everything you can think of to signify modernity is in these places, as well as radium.
So it really becomes a place that women want to go and hang out and be part of.
Yeah, the development of beauty salons is so much to do with the change in the way that women really tackle the world and are accepted by the world as well. So you go out and about a bit more, don't you?
Well, not right now.
Not right now. When you're first looking at women going out places that aren't chaperoned, for instance, you can think of beauty salons. The development of beauty salons and department stores are really important. And of course, when I talk about women in this sense, I'm talking about more upper class, wealthy women whose lives have been quite controlled, to being allowed to go out into these spaces. And I guess own their femininity in a way as well, because it's about clothes and makeup and hair and things like this in those places. It's luxurious.
You mentioned in the book that there was quite a hubbub about a department store putting makeup in a window.
This is another London department store, Selfridges. again, makeup had always been on sale in places like this. And Selfridges had been in a different department store before and things like that. But in 1909, I think it was, they opened this purpose-built, beautiful department store in central London. And within a year, the makeup department had gone from sort of under the counter in the back room to where we associate it now. It's in the front of the building. So mostly when you walk into a department store, the first thing you're hit by the makeup and the perfume. It's an enticing smell. And one of the things I hadn't thought about until I was writing about Selfridges was that actually, in the time that we're talking about, 1910, it's smelly outside. There's horse manure. It's not the clean, beautiful city we would think of. It's horse manure, it smells. And so the idea that you would come from the smelly, dusty street into this palace, and the first thing you would do is smell perfume. In 1909, we're not thinking about lipsticks and nail polish and things like that. We're thinking about brushes, a little bit of face powder probably, some hair tonics. These would be the things that you would be on display. And as I said, perfume, because perfume has always been an acceptable thing.
It's amazing that that was so controversial at the time.
Yeah.
So back to the salons, you write about there is this surplus of X-ray machines after World War I. And the beauty salons really kind of take up that science, as you mentioned. How did they use these X-ray machines?
Again, this is a really surprising link between science and beauty. It was actually Marie Curie that really pioneered X-ray machines in warfare. She saw the benefit of being able to identify what was wrong with a person internally on the front, in the trenches. So she pioneered mobile X-ray machines going to the front, going to the fighting and seeing whether someone had a broken leg or whether a bullet was in them. And it obviously saved thousands of lives. So there was a real interest in X-ray machines in warfare. But after the end of the war in 1918, what on earth do you do with hundreds of X-ray machines? So they were actually auctioned off. I mean, this is specifically in Britain. They had loads of X-ray machines, and you can go and see in the newspapers these war surplus auctions, and they're selling X-ray machines. And they would have been bought, obviously, by doctors and shoe sales companies as well, because X-ray shoe machines were also a thing. But they were also bought by beauty companies. And again, I said that beauty companies were really hitching their wagon to the idea that they were modern, scientific. And what could be more scientific than an X-ray? Now, they weren't using them to identify broken bones in a beauty salon setting. They were actually using them to remove hair. X-rays were discovered in 1895, and people were experimenting with the way that these very, very strong rays would burn away the skin. But they would also find quite soon that where the X-rays had been, it also destroyed the hair follicles. So people were reporting that the hair fell out. A lot of treatments at the beginning were on the head, on the arms, things like that. But somebody clearly had a bright idea that if the hair fell out when you used X-rays, you could actually use this as a beauty treatment. So it's really in the 1920s you start getting these surplus X-ray machines. So end of the war, 1918, 1919, you start getting auctions. 1920, a boom of X-ray hair removal companies. Again, this is in the UK, it's also in the US. And there was one brand called Trico. There was a franchise brand, and they had branches all over the world using these X-ray machines to remove hair. I'm not sure it was a very good idea, actually. So when you think of early X-ray experimenters, it's technology that they don't really understand yet. People get burnt, people get hurt, and that's in a hospital setting. Then you look at the beauty setting where people have 2 weeks training. Often they're using X-ray machines that were designed for something very different. They may not be calibrated properly. You get one X-ray machine from one place, one X-ray machine. The settings will be different, the knobs will be different, how you use them will be different. And yeah, it's really dangerous. It was a really dangerous thing.
Did it work, though? Did it remove hair?
Yes, it does. It does remove hair. It'll also burn your skin.
Were there long-term consequences of women using these machines?
Yes, there wasn't a huge amount of study into this area, but about 30 years after the peak of X-ray hair removal, there was one man who did a study because he was looking at, this is the 1950s, there was a lot of interest then about the damage that had been done across all uses of radioactivity. So there's early scientists, for instance, but then also they were looking at the consumer use as well. And this man, Stanford Cade, who was a London-based surgeon, found that there was lots of women who had had X-ray treatments 20, 30 years earlier, and they were coming back now with tumours and damage, long-term damage. He did a study of them. I think he was working with about 30 people, and not all of them had had the beauty treatments, but there was about 6 of them from his cohort study that had beauty treatments. And it wasn't just hair removal, it was also wart removal as well. So although I do talk about the beauty salons, X-rays are also being used in hospitals for minor skin disorders as well. So it was warts or blemishes as well. So it was being used in a hospital setting, it was also used in a beauty salon setting. It's really awful to read these studies. The reports that have been released of Stanford Cade's work, it's horrible pictures, and it really makes you feel for the people that did that, because I do take radium beauty and X-ray beauty very seriously. But there is that tendency to think, oh my God, what were they doing? And that just sounds so wacky. But again, it was studies like that that really grounds you in the fact that this is real people doing real things. So it's really important to read those studies as well.
When did the popularity start to wane? So this sounds like people are starting to realize that perhaps radium and X-rays are perhaps not the best thing to use on the consumer.
Yeah, it was always understood from the very beginnings of the discoveries of X-rays and radioactive elements that they were dangerous in the wrong hands. And there was a huge debate about whose hands were wrong, if you see what I mean. Beauty salon owners and people who made products for health using radium were always quite clear that they were on the right side of science. They were doing nothing that wasn't being done in labs, that wasn't being done in hospitals. They always argued that they knew what they were doing and they were able to have these products for sale because they were giving proper evidence-based information about what would work and what wouldn't work. I think because people were so certain and because it was so backed up by science, and even into the 1930s, you've still got science labs really experimenting with what radium can do. Hospitals are still using it. It's still the thing. It's still going to save humanity in some ways. So it lasts for a lot longer than you think it's going to. I mean, again, when I came into this project, the general consensus is that it's around about 1933 that you stop getting radium products. And there's 2 reasons cited for that. The first is a group of workers that are popularly called the radium girls. These are women who were painting watches and other objects to make them glow in the dark. And there was also a man called Ibn Bayez who, on his doctor's advice, consumed a huge amount of radioactive water called Radithor. And in 1933, he died, and he died horribly. And he also died very publicly. So his death was reported around the world, front page news, when he was a millionaire playboy who'd won amateur golf contests and things. He was a known person, and he died from drinking too much radium. So this is a great thing to get on your front pages. There was a lot of public interest. So I'd always assumed that those things had kind of killed off the industry. When someone really high profile dies, surely that's the end of it. But it's not. And Ibn Bayez dies in 1933. There's actually a resurgence of radium beauty products in 1933. So you get brand new companies launching, you get other companies reinvigorating themselves. And it's a really interesting response to a very public declaration, really, that your product is not safe. Someone died. They were taking a product made of the same substance that your product is made of, and they died. So people are responding to that. And they're saying, well, he died because he wasn't safe. We are safe. We do it differently. If you use our products, you will not die. Essentially, their marketing. And interestingly enough, it takes another 20 years before radium consumer products really die out. I mean, I say that, but you still got them into the 1960s, and you can still buy things today that are products that claim that they are made with radium. You can still go to spa towns in Czech Republic. I talked earlier about the town where Marie Curie had her pitch blende from. You can still go there now. It still says on when you enter it, welcome to the world's first radon spa. You still go there to get your radioactive water. So it really hasn't died out. It's still there. You can still get the products very easily. I think the difference now is you can't go into Harrods or Selfridges or department stores and buy radium in the same way, but it's not hard to get.
Yeah, I actually looked, and there is a spa in Alabama here in the U.S. that claims to be a radium spa.
There is? I'm coming to it then.
Yes, I'll meet you there. It's on my list.
I mean, in the US, they did have spa towns when they were emphasizing radium, but one of the things with the US is that in the 1950s, when uranium was the thing, when the government was telling people to prospect for uranium because you needed all the uranium you could get for the atomic bomb projects, there was lots of mining towns that didn't have good sources of uranium, but they knew that their rocks were radioactive, so they opened up tunnels and spa towns and things. In the 1950s, you get this sort of resurgence of interest in radioactive healing.
Just popping in to correct myself, the radioactive spa is in Arkansas, not Alabama. I found it on a list of the 10 places in the world where you can take a radium bath. In fact, there are 8 bathhouse buildings in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which gained historic landmark status in 1987. This list only mentions 2 bathhouses which allow radium baths. When I looked into it more closely, there was no mention on the web pages of these spas containing radium, only that they had thermal pools. The closest was one spa which claims their water had been, quote, carbon-14 dated to be 4,000 years old and is high in silica, calcium, magnesium, free carbon dioxide, bicarbonates, and sulfate. Not satisfied with this answer, I searched the scientific literature and found a report from 1990 that tested multiple sites in Hot Springs and indeed found the springs were radioactive due to radon gas, and radium. The spas have gone through great pains to hide the fact that only a century ago it would have been screaming from the rooftops. I also don't want to alarm anyone. The report found that all levels in the bathhouses were well within acceptable radiation limits, and there were a couple of bathhouses that had potential to become hazardous, but the remedy was just sealing cracks and installing a ventilation system. These are the same solutions you would be given if you had a high radon level in your residential basement. You can find all of these links on our webpage. When you look online, if you just type in radioactive beauty products, you find these ads for Thoradia. It's very obvious that there is a Dr. Alfred Curie.
Yes.
So is this a poster that just survives by chance, or was it a very popular beauty product?
It was a hugely popular product. So I've actually got one here. So you can see it says Dr. Alfred Curie. So earlier I mentioned that in 1933, you get a revitalization of interest in radium companies. And Flow Radio is a good example because it launched in 1933. So radium girls, lots of deaths, even buyers. I know what, we're going to launch a beauty company.
Perfect time to do it. I'll do a whole episode on the radium girls. So we're just going to skip over that horrific death because I think we can have a larger conversation about that. Right now, I think it's just really interesting to talk about all of these beauty products. They showed these horrific pictures of Evan Baez and the Radium Girls in paper, and you can see the Radium Girls' jaws removed.
Yep. This is also a year before Marie Curie dies. So Marie Curie, most associated with radium, is visibly deteriorating. She's lost her eyesight. She's very frail. And it is obviously something to do with her work. So you've got deaths, you've got Marie Curie, and then you've got this new product. So it's launched in March 1933 in Paris. The product itself and all the advertising material is very clear that this is a formula that has been made by someone called Dr. Alfred Curie. They are clearly playing on the name Curie. Not only are they advertising that they are made with radium bromide and thorium as well, we're not just interested in one radioactive substance, we're going to go for a double here. There's radium bromide and thorium. We're putting the name Alfred Curie on the box, and we are advertising ourselves with a poster of a beautiful woman who is literally glowing. So in most of the advertising material that they use in the early 30s, there's an illustration of a blonde woman who has lots of the products in front of her, and the products are pulling up a glow, so her entire face is illuminated. Other than it contains radium, they are playing on every association they can just to drive that point home. This is radioactive.
They are beautiful posters. I mean, just
Yes.
looking at it, it's a beautiful advertisement. I see why they have survived and people have placed them on the internet. How long did this product last? Was this one of the products that lasted for a couple decades?
Yeah, well, the actual company itself lasts until the mid-1960s. But the thing I find most interesting about this brand is that, as I said, they really, really go for it with the terms, this contains radium. We're going to put it in the name of the product, all the marketing materials, everything is radium, radium, radium. In the 1940s, France, and as I said, this company was a French company, France made it illegal to put radioactive substances in consumer products. So the company that had branded itself for about a decade then on we are a radioactive company had to pivot when it became illegal. And I find it fascinating because they didn't change the name of the brand. They didn't change anything. They just dropped the name Curie. They still called themselves Thoradia. They obviously no longer contained radium in their products, but then they carried on for another 20 years using the same pictures. So that lady with the glowing face, she's there until into the 40s, into the 50s. I think by the late 50s, she's slightly changed, but there's always that association with glowingness. So they're still trading on the radium, even though it's illegal, even though people know that it's dangerous, even though that, again, I haven't got to the bottom of it, of why people still found this as irresistible. Was it because it was slightly sexy and dangerous? Did it work really, really well and just people couldn't stop themselves from using it? It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. You said you haven't gotten to the bottom of it.
No, one of the sad things about this project has been the lack of, I haven't been able to find diary entries particularly, or anyone really talking about using the products because they were so unremarkable. It wasn't like you would write in your diary, I got up today and bought a radium face cream. You just don't. I mean, maybe you do, but I haven't found it yet. So it's a fairly mundane, low-level thing to do. So it didn't really get that much attention from people at the time. So I haven't really been able to get behind why people were just so reluctant to stop using radium, because there is such a reluctance.
And that must be a frustration when you research beauty products in general. It's such a mundane thing that women don't write about them. I mean, if I kept a diary, I certainly wouldn't be like, oh, I ordered moisturizer online. It's not something that you'd note.
No, it's not. Again, you might mention that you've gone to a beauty salon, especially in, let's say, the 20s when they went through the big, gorgeous refurbishment. I don't necessarily talk about what you've had done there, because there's also an element of privacy about this as well. I talk about how beauty salons and cosmetic counters become a bit more acceptable. But still, there's a reluctance really to discuss the personal beauty treatments that you have. And I don't think we really do that anymore. People are much more open about the beauty treatments, and I think that's a great thing. It's sometimes hard to get behind the history of beauty because it's very difficult to understand people's motivations.
You have a collection of the Radium beauty products. What is the most interesting item in your collection?
The thing that I wanted the most was the faux radio with the name Alfred Curie on it. And I think that's most interesting because not only did I want it so badly, I cried when I got it, but also I actually got that tested as well. So that's being analysed at the moment by a professor and his student at a university, and they're testing the material to see what it is made of. The interesting thing with this is they have the ingredients list on the back. They tell you that it's got 0.01 micrograms of radium bromide in it. So we are going to go and see exactly what is in there and whether it's all talc or whether it actually is what they claimed it to be. So in terms of really wanting something and finding it fascinating, that was definitely that.
Is there a takeaway message to your book?
What I wanted to discover and what I wanted to impart was the use of science, the use of things that normal people don't necessarily feel that they understand or do understand, is a bit more nuanced than it is assumed to be. And the takeaway message that I wanted to give was that we shouldn't look back on people's use of radium or arsenic or lead or any of the other things that we could talk about in terms of dangerous beauty items as those people being stupid in any way or being manipulated or conned, no more than, you know, our grandkids will look back on some of the stuff that we do. So I really wanted to give the message that the beauty industry is nuanced. There are people that really do understand science and work at the cutting edge of science as well. It may have subsequently not worked out. It may have subsequently been proven that it was not a good idea. But we don't look on people like Marie Curie or Edison or those types of people and go, oh, you're just stupid. We look back on them and say, well, you didn't really have the same information that we do, so you did kind of the best you could at the time. You may have ignored a few key messages, but ultimately your heart was in the right place. Whereas I think some of these beauty companies, their heart was in the right place as well. There's people who were absolutely devastated to realise that their products had harmed people or potentially could have harmed people. They were absolutely devastated. Those people who lived their entire lives making these products. There's a father and son team. The son had spent his entire life making a radium product and was really gutted. He wasn't trying to con people. He was producing something that he actually truly believed in.
How has radium impacted our lives? Looking back, has it impacted our life today?
Sometimes I think that the sort of uncontrolled use of radium and the consequences of it and the terror that we now feel has impacted our lives as well. I mean, I wonder whether the way that some people feel about nuclear, for instance, I wonder if we hadn't have had that massive interest in the use of radium products, whether the trajectory of the use of nuclear power and the acceptance of nuclear as well would be very different. There's a lot of misunderstanding between people who are fearful of radioactivity, but it's so undefined. They get mixed up between radium and atomic stuff, and people just get very concerned. And I think if it hadn't been for the interest in radium, we wouldn't have been so caught up today, perhaps, in fears of radioactivity.
Thank you for listening to My Nuclear Life. Before we go, I wanted to remind you of an opportunity to receive bonus content, including unreleased conversations with guests and even conversations with guests not previously featured on the show. We're also going to be dropping a new segment, Quirky News, in the near future. If you head over to patreon.com/mynuclearlife, you can sponsor us for as little as $1 a month. All levels come with podcast swag, which could include stickers, magnets, and postcards. So head over and check it out. There are other ways to support us on our website, mynuclearlife.com, and if you haven't already, the best way to support us is for free. Please tell your friends about us and rate, review, and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. I would like to thank my guest, Lucy Santos, for spending her time explaining this amazing topic to me. And as always, Lexi Weghorn for her help with this podcast. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time when Robert Franklin will join me to discuss the Hanford Nuclear Lab. You don't want to miss it. I'm Shelly Lesher, and this has been My Nuclear Life.